is William, hopefully your favorite videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I welcome you to another Two Hats special of community events. Let's look in and see what's really happening.
Good afternoon and welcome to Lambda Weekly. I'm Dave Taffet and I'm here in the studio with Lerone Landis and the late Patti Fink, who we promised you last week was going to be very, very late, but she's here today.
Yeah. Yes, of course.
So,
of course I am.
We just found out Lerone is going on a school trip with his daughter, and the surprising part was he had to pass a background check, and he passed.
It's shocking, I tell you.
You know, they're completely ignoring all those years he spent in the federal pen. They're ignoring, just all that stuff. But it's okay. Our kids are safe.
I used somebody else's fingerprints.
Oh, there you go.
That's how you did it. That's how you did it. So this is leading up to our guest.
David's known for his horrible segues.
No, it's actually a good one.
I was thinking, how is this fitting with today's topic?
Because we're talking about curfews.
Okay.
And why we should lock up all of the teenagers in Dallas County. The streets would be a lot safer. And the city council voted that way this week.
10-5.
10-5, yes. The Four Amigos and Sandy Grayson voted against. The other 10 voted for. Our guest is Mayra Fierro, and Mayra has an interesting story about having been homeless herself, which could have been criminalized. I mean, so many things that you could have done could have led to an arrest, actually, for being homeless. We'll let you tell the story. But this week was that curfew vote. And I know you spoke in front of the city council, and we're on opposite sides on this because I think the kids should be arrested. Mayra doesn't.
Leave it to David.
So tell us why all of these criminal kids shouldn't be arrested, fined, sent to an adult court, and not be allowed to have any kind of legal representation. I think it's a good law.
Let's tell us, what does the ordinance say?
So the ordinance, the way that Magoo's ordinance was proposed now, it's a $50 fine for young people after 2 warnings. And what ends up happening, which is the biggest point in everything, City Council asked what the consequences were of not paying the fine. They had the option between the civil and the criminal ordinance. And in the civil ordinance, failure to pay a fine would end up with a debt, versus in the criminal ordinance, failure to pay a fine leads to an arrest warrant.
And what are the curfew times?
It's 11 to 6 on the weekdays and 12 to 6 on the weekends.
6 p.m.?
6 a.m.
6 a.m.
So you have to be in the house by 11 o'clock at night.
Does it also include, like during school hours?
Yes. It includes school hours from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m.
Okay, so let's say you're running late one day. I'm not encouraging lateness for kids. However, it happens. Patti never got to school before noon. What happens if you're on your way to school, you walk to school, you're on your way, and you happen to be a little bit late?
Then you have a potential to get a citation.
So it's not just a truancy or a lateness that does get held against you on your, especially if you're missing a class, a teacher can hold that against you and lower your grade, but this could actually be criminal.
Right. The citation in itself is criminal, and besides the criminal nature, you're still left with having to show up at court, and like you mentioned, without the attorney representation, if the young people did have school, they would need to be accompanied more likely with a parent, so that's a parent's time that also has to go to court to handle this. There are exceptions in the ordinance, but again, you'd have to prove those exceptions.
What are some of those? Like a parent being with you?
Like a parent being with you, you being on an errand for your parents, coming back from a school or community function, things like that.
Okay, so one of the things they wanted to do to keep kids off the street is give them something to do. So they were talking about opening the rec centers in the evenings and having a variety of programs for kids. You know, basketball, because there are basketball courts in most of the rec centers. Other games, some classes, enrichment type classes like art classes, stuff like that, to involve kids in a variety of things. Did that go anywhere?
So that was actually something that I sent out to some of the council members, which was a very, very bare bones proposal that just said use the rec centers, extend their hours, and get some of the homeless youth service providers to be able to do events together and have the events be engaging in a way that also allows for social workers to do their interventions and case management.
That's really, really smart. That would be a smart solution.
Yeah, Patty, you and I are going to have a tough this show because we have a smart guest.
And with that being said, there is $500,000 that are being allocated to be able to do some of the services, but I haven't seen what those services are actually going to look like or how much my idea has actually carried forward.
Okay, so kids are at a rec center, and then they have to get home, and they can be arrested on the way home.
Well, and here's where people are going to intervene. It's not necessarily an arrest with the citation. It's supposed to be 2 warnings. So if an officer stops you the first time, you get a warning. The second time, you get a warning. The third time, you're actually supposed to get a citation.
So Monday, you get a warning. Tuesday, you get a warning. Wednesday, you're arrested. I'm seriously talking. What about kids who have parents who work in the evening and they seriously are using this because the choice is they're home alone?
Right. And that's the principle that I'm against. You can't just criminalize youth. I feel that if the city council actually did want to make an ordinance to protect youth, we would have a youth bill of rights in the city that reaffirms a young person's right to safety and that trusting adult that can help them through whatever it is that they got going on. Young people experience the same types of life crisis that adults have, but we just expect them to handle it better.
So what is this age cap? 18 or 17?
17.
17.
Okay, so you're 16, you're at a rec center. I mean, I'm saying it facetiously, but it's a serious question. You're at a rec center, you're participating in whatever activity, maybe you were talking to a social worker, all these things. Let's say they did all of them. And then you have to go home.
Right.
And you live 3 blocks away.
Right.
I mean, you might live farther, and a police officer stops you. You're still going to get cited. You have to take time off for school, or is this night court?
And see, there's been so much back and forth that it's unclear what's going to happen with the new one that got voted in on Wednesday. But one of the things that had been originally suggested was night court to be able to facilitate that for
Okay,
parents.
so then you're on your way home from night court and you get arrested again. I'm not getting the sense in this ordinance.
I don't either. I think that there is a much better way that Dallas could be doing this.
And not just that, but it's, let's say you're 16 years old and you're over at a friend's house, playing video games or whatever, and you live in Fort North Dallas. What are your odds of getting pulled over and cited?
They're significantly less. The majority of citations are actually coming out of District 6.
So
and
this
District 6 is where?
West Dallas.
West Dallas.
West Dallas.
So this is disproportionately affecting youth of color.
Yes, 70% of the citations have been issued to Latinx youth and 18% towards Black youth.
Wow.
And
how many towards white youth? That would be a very little amount. That we were 88? 12% open for white and other.
Something like that, yeah.
Wow. Okay.
And all that's available in the memo that was released that includes the DPD's presentation on it back in June to the Public Safety Commission.
Is part of the reason they're doing this because, this will be enforced by Dallas Police, and the Dallas Police Force is so overstaffed that they're looking for things for the police to do. And I'm serious. We have a problem in the city with retention of police officers because we don't really want to pay them. We expect them to do a lot of work, but we don't want to pay. who is going to enforce this?
I don't know. See, my whole thing is that it should be social workers and case managers and youth workers to make that first initial contact with DPD. In one of our earlier meetings, one of the things that was discussed is, what do you do with the trafficked youth at 3 a.m.? Like, how do you actually help that young person? And it boiled down to officers needing the curfew in order to interact. But the argument fell flat when we pointed out that there'd be different procedures depending on the time of day that they would use to interact with a potentially trafficked youth.
Because we currently have that ordinance that prevents police officers from talking to people.
There is no ordinance that prevents officers from talking to people. And we
That's
do.
the whole point, David.
No, I'm serious. What is the? And I have to keep saying, but I'm serious here because I don't mean to be taking this lightly, and I'm really not. I think this is a horrible ordinance. It's just not making any sense to me.
No, nothing makes sense. An officer has the right to talk to anybody at any time. They also have the right to charge anybody at any time with
Right.
whatever crime they are committing.
And that's my reasoning where ever since I was a kid, I've never been crazy about the idea of curfews. Because if someone's doing something, then address that. If someone's doing something wrong, then address that. But simply seeing a teenager out late at night who's minding their own business, perhaps just walking home, why are you stopping them?
Right.
I don't understand that.
Now, if they were stopping them to offer them a ride home, you know
Okay.
what? It's 11 o'clock at night.
But that's different.
Let me drive you home.
That's different.
And if the kid resists, you know, I don't want you out on the street at 11 o'clock at night in whatever part of the city. And I'm going to drive you home.
And
I don't have a problem with that at all.
No, and of course, if you see like a little kid out on the street by themselves at night, like somebody my kid's age, 10-year-old or 8-year-old, like, okay, where are your parents? Yeah, that's different. But seeing a 16, 17-year-old young lady or young man just walking, minding their own business, not doing anything.
The other
I don't
question I have
understand.
is McDonald's planning on closing earlier in the evening.
Not that I'm aware of.
And again, I'm being serious.
Yeah.
Who do you think half the staff at McDonald's is? It's their own slogan is, "We're your best first job."
Yep.
Yep.
When should kids be working there? 9 to 5? Well, no, they're supposed to be in
They're
school
in
those
school.
hours, so they're working after hours, and they have to get home from work after hours. And if they don't have a car, they don't have a car, so they walk home.
Right.
And again, while we're on this, I want to bring. Years ago, there was an issue in far north Dallas on Preston. There's a McDonald's on Preston between Campbell and like Frankfurt up there, and they could not get any. They couldn't hire anybody. One, Dart didn't go there. Dart's not widely used in far north Dallas, and they couldn't get any young people in the area to work at McDonald's. And I think that's my biggest concern about this is the target citations, because there is no real plan to look at kids in North Dallas, and they will be out after 11,
Absolutely.
guaranteed. They, that this is really targeting specific people in the community, specific young people, and that's a problem.
We're talking about picking up kids in the neighborhood who are just walking. Part of the curfew is during school hours. Well, if a police officer sees a kid during school hours just wandering around, we established they're allowed to talk to people.
Right.
A kid might be walking to school or going home for whatever reason. It's okay for the police officer to drive them there. It'll get the kid to school faster. Isn't that the goal?
The few officers that I've actually talked to about this, that's their go-to. If it's during the day, where are you supposed to be at? What's your school? And they'll go drop off the youngster at school. Without
which it takes an ordinance to allow them to do.
It doesn't.
Right.
It doesn't.
I wasn't at the city hall meeting when you spoke, but I'm just curious, was there any discussion about what other cities have done with their curfews, other big cities, and
Or their non-curfews.
or their non-curfews,
Right.
and what has been the result?
So everybody talks about Austin having gotten rid of their curfew. I'm going to talk about Waco. They got rid of their curfew, and they're also one of the cities that have seen a drop in youth criminal activity and youth victimization. So that's the trend we're actually seeing with cities doing away with curfews.
Gotcha.
Why do you think that is? Is it because, okay, we don't have a curfew, but that kid shouldn't be on the street, so I can go over to him and, oh, he's supposed to be in school, let me take him there? And the police officer is thinking, well, I don't have to cite him. We don't have anything to cite him for. He should be in school. I'm going to take him to school.
So, for example, in San Antonio, another city without an ordinance, what an officer does is they end up taking that young person to a shelter. So if they can't get a hold of a parent, you go straight to a shelter. Yeah,
at night.
So that's still ways better than just giving somebody a ticket. Because if somebody does need some sort of intervention, how do you know that it's safe to take that youngster home?
That's
Right.
So
They may have been out the door because it's not safe to be home.
right,
San Antonio does not have a curfew.
they have decriminalized their curfew.
Cool.
Okay, so they have a civil.
They have. I'd have to look at the specifics.
Well, and if it
we
works
can do that
there,
during the break, which we need to take in a minute.
if it works there, it surely can work here. San Antonio is now bigger than Dallas.
Right.
So,
Right. We're going to talk about how dangerous it can be for a kid to be outside. Criminalizing their being outside doesn't necessarily solve that, because you have a very personal story to tell about that, don't you? You're listening to Lambda Weekly on 89.3 KNON FM. I'm Dave Taffet here in the studio with Lerone Landis and the late Patti Fink. Mayra Fierro is our guest.
This is Rollins Gilliland, and I'm listening to Lambda Weekly on 89.3, and darn glad to be doing it.
And this is Lambda Weekly. I'm Dave Taffet here in the studio with Lerone Landis and the late Patti Fink. Our guest is Mayra Fierro. We're just talking about the new curfew that's coming into existence tomorrow, is it?
Yeah.
Into effect,
Tomorrow.
yeah.
Into effect tomorrow. And we're glad it is, because the city is going to be so much safer tomorrow than it is today. So be careful today. If you see a kid on the street, avoid them at all costs, because,
Those young people. One of the things that's disturbing to me about this is that we're expecting our kids, our young people, to go from this sort of you have no rights, you have no expectation of personal responsibility, you have no growth into adulthood, and then bam, you're an adult the second you turn 18.
right.
There's no transition, there's no prep for kids. They don't begin to, say, in junior high, like, manage their time and learn to manage their time and learn to manage where they are and that sort of thing. That a curfew kind of, I think, for some kids and some parents will be sort of a crutch.
Yeah.
And a lot of kids won't be allowed to go out in the evening to activities if their parents say, well, I don't want you out to risk after curfew, so you have to stay home tonight. And then other kids are going to be criminalized for going about and trying to grow into adulthood. Go do things, be
Right.
active, be involved, see their friends, go out, have a job, lots of things. And there's like, bam, you're there.
You're an adult.
Yeah, just to piggyback off of that, in Texas, one of the markers of growing up is getting your driver's license at 16. I think this changed. Is it 17 now or something, or 18? I don't know. But 16, you get your driver's license. You have either a little more or a lot of freedom. Your mom or dad let you go to the store, pick up this, go to that, go over a friend's house, and then you get to drive to school events. You go to the dance. Those dances go well past 11 o'clock. You go to homecoming football games. Those things go well past 11 o'clock. So what's going to happen now? If a cop sees you look obviously really young, are you going to get stopped?
So it's interesting that you say that, because that's what an officer needs to approach somebody with a curfew. You look young.
Really, that's all they need.
Yes.
You don't have to be doing any sort of criminal behavior or anything that they might be arrested for, other than
You look young,
Just-
and it's this time of day.
And so somebody who's 19, might look 18 or 17.
And someone who's, not, in the teens.
Or
could
somebody who was young like Patti and looked like a tramp from the age of 12, she wouldn't be stopped. How is that fair?
Yeah.
I don't find a lot of things fair. Another interesting thing, when you're talking about how we view our adults, I've always thought it was interesting that Texas is one of those states that's very quick to try a minor as an adult.
Yes.
Well, speaking
You're
of that,
absolutely right.
speaking
The
of
board doesn't
that,
swing both
they're
ways.
not going to youth court.
No.
These go to adult court.
Well, actually, these go to community court, but the citation in itself is still criminal in nature.
And you don't get an attorney, though.
No.
Why? How's that constitutional?
Yeah, how's that?
That's where we need to ask our city hall folks.
So this could be declared unconstitutional. I
Yes.
mean,
Potentially.
they arrest the wrong person. Not that I know any smart asses, but you arrest the wrong person, this is going to the Supreme Court. I would think. I mean, how is it?
How
it's
is it
not legal?
How is it not legal? Everybody has the right to representation.
These are all great questions I don't have answers to.
So here's a question too. What happens if you're a kid who's been cited for being out past the curfew, and you have a small amount of pot? According to our new DA, those are not going to be, bookable offenses.
Mm-hmm.
Like where you go to jail.
Right.
So it's going to get kind of complex. And then it's going to be like it's this way in the city of Dallas, but it's not that way in the city of Mesquite, or it's not that way in Irving. And it's going to be about where you are too, So if you're kind of, are police officers going to have to like pull up Google Maps and try to figure out if they're in the city of Dallas or that little finger of Richardson, or Cedar Hill or something like that to figure out where are we?
Right, you might live in Richardson where it's perfectly legal for you to be out at 11:02, but the police officer did a long loop around the block and you were walking home from your McDonald's job a couple of blocks into Dallas. And I'm thinking of a particular place where that could easily happen. This could get kind of complicated, couldn't it?
I think this whole thing has been complicated, which is why I don't understand why we've rushed everything.
What are the proponents' arguments for wanting this?
Protect young people.
That's all I say. Okay.
Now, the majority of people who were arrested, people of color, you said the majority in District 6, the
Yes.
District 6 council person, Omar Narvaez, voted against it, so he didn't want it in his area. But the rest of the most arrests for curfew have always been across South Dallas, and other than Scott Griggs, they all voted for it.
Right. And not just voted for it. So something else is they literally, if you go back and watch the video, they voted down Omar's ordinance, which was the civil. 10 minutes later voted for the criminal. Like,
Wow.
that's how that went down.
Wow.
And what was the argument against just the civil? Because civil would be more, you'd be cited, but there's no criminal record for it. I mean,
Right.
You're standing on a street corner at 10:59, perfectly legal. You're still there 2 minutes later, or you cross the street because the traffic light was long and it's now 11:01 and you're across the street, you're illegal.
So I don't really understand what the arguments against it were. The questions that were asked, and I remember most, Tanell Atkins actually is the one who asked the question, what happens if somebody doesn't pay that debt? And that's the key difference between the civil and the criminal citation. There's other differences. For example, the civil citation would have required a little bit more stricter management and collection of data for these citations, so we can start looking at the actual issue with some data. Speaking of which, the city of Dallas, the only data that we have for those citations is those racial disparities. We don't have much else showing how many youth were actually victims at after hours, or if the young persons were also involved in a crime at the time, which is all, again, relevant. So what are young people out doing after hours? So
Because there's a big difference between a kid who's out late because he's coming home from work and the kid who is getting into trouble one way or another. I mean,
Huge difference.
Huge difference.
there's
There's no data at all on behavior, like what they were doing at the time that they were young and at this time violating the law.
No, what we have as far as raw data is the date, time, age, gender, race, and actual street address of where those citations were given. And we have that going back 10 years. So we have the data to be able to find out the trends of where young people are and when they're at to be able to provide those intervention services. That's what I see in that data. But data as to why they were out, we don't.
Wow.
So we don't know at all whether this ordinance was needed or not.
Right.
Is what it comes down to. All we know is they were out after 11 p.m., and that seems to be a problem.
Yes.
And the council panicked because they're suddenly without an ordinance for 6 weeks,
Yes.
and they got to pass something.
Right before spring break.
Yeah.
Right. Mayra, how did you get involved with this? Championing this cause.
Well, for myself, I was a young person who was kicked out of my home at 17 after having come out to my parents. So I have wandered the streets of Dallas at those hours. Now, being at 17, I was beyond the curfew age. But that didn't change the ways that officers saw me when I was on the street.
And had this happened a few weeks earlier, you would have been in violation of the curfew. There's not a big difference between 16 and 11 months and 17 and 1 month.
Right. And you 17 and 16, I'm sure you didn't look that different.
No. And
They still would have stopped you based on you saying because you look young.
Right. And it's interesting because my background here, having been born and raised in Dallas, I graduated law magna in high school. So having graduated law magna, we're very involved with the police department, police procedures, the law and government. I spent my time at the criminal court interned with an attorney who was handling a federal court my senior year of high school. Graduated high school at the age of 16 and actually turned 17 my first week of college. So
you were a college student at 17.
Yes.
Wow, good for you.
Good for me, right? Sounds great. I had everything going for me. My parents kicked me out at 17, and I get to find out what 17 is in this weird limbo of age and the way Texas sees you and your actual rights. So one of the most memorable things for me is after my parents kicked me out, I obviously need a job. I need to find a way to support myself. At that time, I applied for Wachovia Bank. They had a position for teller. I sent in my resume, and I nailed my phone interview. So much that the lady went ahead and sent me the application to fill out. Filled out the application, I get a call back. Mayra, I can't hire you. What do you mean you can't hire me? You're not 18. You have to be 18 to handle money.
Wow. That's arbitrary.
It really was. That job back in 2007 paid $12 an hour, had benefits. That would have changed my entire life.
Yeah.
Would have given me that needed stability that I needed in that exact moment. It's knowing that things like that are set up to trip up young people and that they trip me up that drive me forward to come back and want to remove the obstacles or other pitfalls that young people don't need to experience while they're trying to grow and thrive.
That's amazing.
And just to bring the story a little bit forward, have you reconciled with your parents?
It's a work in progress. I'm in active conversations with my mother, and my father and I will be a much longer process, but we're working on it.
And that's good to hear. Not that it helps at all from when you were 17 and needed their help.
Right.
So,
You know, this is one of the things that I think a lot of people don't really get. I was speaking to a relative not all that long ago, about a year ago, and we were talking about. I said, I brought up the fact that DISD had like 3,300 youth who were experiencing homelessness, and I thought it was amazing that they were staying in school and able to do that. And he said that can't be true. And I'm like, sure it is.
Yeah,
and like 40% of kids experiencing homelessness self-identify as LGBTQ. Mm-hmm. And he's like, well, people don't, and this was in Texas, and he's a Texan. He says, well, people don't kick their kids out of their homes anymore. I said, the hell they don't. It's happening all over the state. And a lot of these kids in East Texas and all around will come to Dallas because there are resources in Dallas. And I said, there are people kids in Dallas who have been kicked out of their homes. And you're an example of that.
Yep.
And it's like for people to suddenly think, oh, well, you have marriage equality, you have all these things, that all of that bigotry is gone now, is as laughable as, we're post-racial. There's no racism in the country anymore. That's
because we
just
had a black
crap.
president.
Yeah. Right.
God,
That's just crap. So I hope it comes home to listeners who may not be fully aware that it still happens.
It still happens. I still know youngsters who it's happened to this day. The young people who are homeless are kids who have been in the foster care system. They're kids who have been kicked out for being LGBTQ, or they're actual teens' mothers. So there's a lot of different things that we as a community could start better doing. I mean, I've grown up hearing, it takes a village to raise a child, but I haven't seen that village.
That's a great point.
I participated in the youth homeless count, and I mean, God, the kids we met, it just, what a gut-wrenching night. But we met some really sweet kids who are doing everything they can to just try to survive. And one of the kids, we were going to bring a backpack for him because he had no way. We were giving out
The blessing bags.
Little bags of it had shampoo and soap,
toiletries and all that.
A few little pieces of something to eat. He couldn't take an extra one because he had no way to carry it around. So we were going to come back the next night, bring him a backpack so that he'd have a way to carry it. The police had cleared the streets, and none of the kids were around. Because we had asked them, are you usually right here on this corner? And they said, yeah, this is where we spend every night. Gone. Who knows where they are. Great.
Where are those kids? Where do they go when that happens? Do you know, Mayra?
I don't specifically know. I know where young people tend to hang out to try to be safe. So with that homeless youth count, I got to participate again this year. Last year, I participated as team lead for South Dallas. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we did is hang out at Walmart. Because Walmart is open. You're just a customer. Nobody's going to bother you. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we did is at the beginning of our time, because you have, I think it was like from 9 to 12 last year, we'd go in a Walmart, do a walk around, notice who's in Walmart, and then come back around maybe around 11 and find out who's still at Walmart, who's still just kind of hanging around. And we were able to see the young people who just kind of stuck out.
How many kids did you count?
Last year in South Dallas, I want to say we had 3 or 4. The total count for the city of Dallas, I believe, had 73. Mm-hmm. And then the results from this year are still being put together. But I think that they should have a report out by the State of the Homeless Address happening later this month.
Now, before the show, you had said to us that you weren't homeless as in on the street. You couch surfed, which is how a number of kids who are homeless live.
And couch surfing means that a friend lets you literally sleep on their couch, or you might have a relative or someone that you know. Talking to homeless service providers, one of the things that they say is that young people have that ability because they haven't, quote unquote, burnt out those relationships. So it's easier for them to lean in. So with the homeless youth count this year, when we went out, it was on a very, very cold day. I want to say it was like a Sunday. There were no youth out. Mm-hmm. We found about 8 adults. But the young people was pretty much understood that they all had found a friend to crash at, and they weren't going to be out exposed to the elements.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually they will burn out those relationships, though. Because if you say, well, you could stay at my place for the weekend, but then on Monday you're going to have to go. Or, I get a night here and then 4 nights there and then 2 nights here. Eventually that pool of that network
falls apart.
Yeah.
Yeah, the homeless youth today is your homeless adult tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, once you get in, once you become homeless, it's hard to get out.
It is.
How were you able to change your life and get out of that?
For me, I don't think it was about changing my life. I went through a lot of self-reflection to find out that there wasn't anything wrong with my life. It was just the lack of support that I had at home. And it was really just finding myself to know that, hey, you were on top of your game. You had graduated school. You were on your way to great things. This is something that you're going through, but it's not your end. And being able to be smart about things. So the job that I ended up taking after the teller job fell through was at a law office as a file clerk, because I wasn't going to go work at McDonald's. I understood that McDonald's was a great first job, but I also knew that the pay difference starting was going to be an issue. And even then in 2007, at 17, I knew that that wasn't going to be a livable wage. So I went with the little file clerk job that paid the $9 an hour. And I was able to work in that law office until I was promoted and eventually left at like $11 or $12 an hour. But it was having the full-time job that gave me not only a place to be, but then gave me money to be able to feed myself and kind of figure out where I could be. I wasn't burning out relationships. If I was crashing with somebody, I was buying groceries, I was giving them a ride, I was helping them with this or that. I wasn't just being a mooch.
This is Lambda Weekly. We need to take a break. Our guest today is Mayra Fierro, who Councilman Philip Kingston calls an unstoppable badass, and that's why.
Right.
We'll be back with more Lambda Weekly right after this.
Hi, this is Valletta Lil, and I listen to Lambda Weekly. I hope that you will too.
And this is Lambda Weekly. I'm Dave Taffet here in the studio with Lerone Landis and the late Patti Fink. Unstoppable badass Mayra Fierro is our guest.
That's an official title.
That's her new official title, Josh just said. Yes, it certainly is. And your story about bringing yourself up, when I was doing the youth homeless count, one of the people that we approached, he was about 24 or so. He's been on the street since he was 16. It happened when his mother died, and CPS didn't step in. No services provided whatsoever. And I was with the people from Promise House, and so they asked him, "Is there something that you need that, or do you have a goal?" I think was one of the questions. And he said, "I'd like to get my GED." And they said, "Done. We can get you into a class that can help you get your GED." And he was like shocked. He'd been on the streets for about 6 years. Nobody had offered him anything. I mean, what a simple thing. There are GED classes all over the place. All you have to do is be able to access them. And it just takes somebody holding your hand, showing you where it is. No reason that somebody who's young, who doesn't have his GED, would know where it is. You seem to have figured out for yourself a whole bunch of things that you should have had help figuring.
Exactly. I realized that I'm different from most young people in the sense that I've been pretty independent. But one of the things I've brought here today is the homeless handbook. Mm-hmm. And it's just the homeless youth handbook. It's available online and in print. But it's literally a handbook for youth who are currently homeless. I didn't have this growing up. It would have been pretty cool to have it. It answers so many different things. Like, do you have a right to still go to school without an address? What are your rights when it comes to employment, getting health services? All this to say that there are plenty of resources that currently exist, including those GED classes, that need to be put back in the hands of young people. I do believe that our system has many, many faults. And I spent a lot of time angry at a lot of different organizations and people doing the quote-unquote work for being inadequate. But actually having been thrown in the game, quote-unquote, you realize that everybody's doing the best they can. And the actual work is a lot, and what we need is better collaboration. So when it comes to seeing young people in the streets, one of those ideas, dreams that I have would be putting a collection of those resources that already exist in the city of Dallas and making them accessible to young people in the form of some sort of a resource directory, which I know the city of Dallas at one point had. And DISD also has a resource guide for homeless youth. Why not combine those and get in the rest of the youth service providers, create a schedule of events that everybody's already hosting naturally as they're directing programs, with the locations mapped over the city of Dallas, including the bus routes. So if a young person does need a quote-unquote place to be, there's already a nonprofit running a program that a young person can access. And If you can,
And you know, you're saying it's so simple. We know about a lot of those organizations. There's no reason that a 16-year-old should, in any way, know that those things exist.
Right. I think that's really brilliant, and you know, maybe get on the blue card that police officers in Dallas PD carry. It's a card that has resources on it for people who are experiencing domestic violence. That they routinely carry them on their persons. They hand them out.
That would be great. Like maybe even just a youth directed type thing that even includes a youth's quote unquote rights. Like you have a right to be safe. You have a right to, you know, report abuse if that's what's happening. But let that be known, and that's where I think our officers can really come in. They don't have to be the bad guy. They don't have to be the one dragging kids off to jail. They could be
They don't want to be that person. No police officer I know wants to be that person.
The officers that I have talked to, their biggest thing in all of this is wanting to protect people. They have a real strong sense of wanting to keep people safe. And I don't think in the city of Dallas that's possible. We're really big. But one thing that we can do as grown-ups is be able to give those resources back to young people, because they're pretty smart. Back on the 13th, there was a couple young people who actually addressed city council about the curfew. And if you go back, they're on it. Like that's the generation that's coming through, and they're really bright. And they just need help.
And resources.
They need to know the resources are there.
You know, and going back to the curfew, I don't see how in any way this addresses any of that. You mentioned something about, what about somebody who suffered some domestic abuse? Well, if you're an adult, there are certain things that you can access. What about if you're a kid and you're under the curfew, and the reason you're out of your house is it just wasn't safe there?
Right.
Instead of taking you to some service, a shelter where you'll be protected, you're going to be cited for violating the law by being out of the house and being on the street. Are there any provisions for... I know there are certain circumstances, like if you can not be at work so that you can be in court to prove that you were supposed to be at work.
At that point, though, and that's a good question, but my question is, is it the responsibility of an officer or the police department to have that training for an officer to be able to get that information out? Because if I'm going through a crisis, I might just be shutting down and wanting everybody to get away from me, so I start lashing out. But what I really need is somebody to actually intervene. And again, does an officer have that kind of capacity to do that?
We ask our officers in Dallas, and we have over time, to do so many things. They're supposed to be mental health experts. We've had these, story upon report of, people calling 911 because they have a mentally ill relative who is acting out in the home, and the police officers come and the person is shot dead.
Right.
And then our police officers are supposed to be handling all the stray dogs in Dallas. Well, let's put it on them to handle all the stray dogs, and so we develop a resources through the Dallas Animal Services Department to handle that. And there's this is yet another need. So rather than approach this in a criminal way, there could be a compassion way that would really reach out and have people who are, maybe an officer could call a hotline and have a team come out and talk to a young person, and find out what their needs are. And so it's not all on the police officer to convey all those resources and do all of those things, but we should have some place where, or some system in place where young people aren't penalized simply because they have a life. And their life happens to be this. It's in this moment. It doesn't mean it's always going to be. And I just find we could do so much better. We could do so much better.
One of the kids that we met the night of the youth homeless survey, we weren't calling it a count, we were calling it a survey. We met a kid, he had some mental health concerns. How somebody who's living on the street and has been for a couple of years because he was thrown out of his house, how could you not have some mental health concerns? But he opened up to one of the women from Promise House, and so she was going to connect him with some mental health services. it's not a police officer's job, role, or something that they would know how to do. But the police department does get training in a number of things. And Patty, you do some police department training in LGBT issues.
Cultural competency.
There needs to be some kind of training in some youth issues, homeless youth issues, it seems like, just so that they can help. And they wouldn't be expected to know all these things. I mean, this gets into all kinds of issues. So getting back to the survey, LGBT kids are more likely by a whole lot to be the ones who are homeless on the street, like you were. But you weren't really on the street. You were mostly couch surfing and doing, I say okay, but I mean okay as opposed to good. You were doing, you were surviving.
I survived.
But you would be likely under this new curfew to have been caught somehow, some way, between houses, between,
Yeah, no, for me, life was rough. I woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning to be able to catch the buses to get myself to Eastfield, where I had tried taking classes. And then my classes would get around noon, get on a train, go all the way up to far north Dallas. Got in with one of those weird, like, door-to-door ticket salesman companies, where we would then drive to, like, Frisco or somewhere else that was equally far, and literally go door to door until maybe around 9, 10 o'clock at night, then have to come back, catch that train to take me all the way home.
Wow. and DART, I just tell you, DART goes where DART wants to go. It doesn't go where the people are or go where they need to go and be. There's a complete disconnect between DART and those who could be potential riders.
Right.
And those who rely on it.
And this is another thing about that curfew. If you're a young kid out after hours and you're in your own car, you're not likely to be stopped.
So with the ordinance, you're not supposed to be stopped if you're, like, interstate travel. But
still, I'm talking about, in all practicality, police officers at night are not looking into every windshield to see, he looks 16, 20, 20, 20, 16, pull him over. They're not doing that. There's no way that they can. But a kid who's riding DART home from his job could get stopped by the DART police officers who are on the trains.
Right, and from the couple of youth that I have known, I know they do have an issue with DART officers that are trying to enforce the curfew. So that's the other thing. How are you supposed to travel if their means of transportation is being watched? Yeah, that's it. What do kids do? Is there an issue with IDs? Like, if you're 18 but you don't have an ID so you can prove it. IDs are so crucial. So crucial. So with the one interaction that I did have with an officer, it was my ID that saved me, because I needed to be able to prove that I was who I said I was and that I wasn't a criminal. Because what he ended up doing was checking my background, and it was because of my ID that he knew who I was. But there are so many teens and homeless youth that do not have their documents. They can't apply for a lease. They can't apply for a job. They can't enroll in school. And these are all the things that we expect young people who are doing good things to be doing. And they can't do that without the IDs. So there's currently some bills for the Texas Ledge to get rid of the fines associated with getting those documents, and also to require that the foster care facilities be able to give sign, I guess the case manager, social worker, sign for the parents in order to get a driver's license, which is something that the young people have been prevented from having. Or they could have been kicked out and they didn't even get a chance to grab their wallet. Right. And in my case, my parents actually allowed me to come back into the house and get my documents. Like, I literally had a moment where my mom gave me my birth certificate and my social security card. Like, that would have been a setback for at least 6 months trying to get my things in order without those two.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Such a simple act.
Yeah. It's something that you already had.
Right.
Yeah.
So.
I was able to register for school. When I got the job, I was able to prove my identity and start working immediately.
That's
we only
so
have a few
important.
minutes left. I want you to tell us about Serial and Civil Rights.
Yeah, so Serial and Civil Rights is just a little thing I do every other month. It is on May 4th. At Deep Ellum Bookstore in Deep Ellum, our topic is going to be the environment. It's a space that I created to have a conversation with the community. Oftentimes we go through a lot of these changes, but we don't actually talk about what it means and how it affects us. So it's a chill space. What you can expect is cereal, cartoons, and conversation.
Excellent.
And so environment, you're in favor of it.
Yes, I
to
support
make these
Mother
things
Earth.
clear.
I stand with Mother Earth.
Ah, nice of you. You did a little bit of work also on, and I'm pulling this from your Facebook. We've been Facebook friends for a long time. Met a couple of times, but never really knew each other at all. DACA.
So with DACA, I've not been as involved as I could be. But if there is a rally or that somebody needs like literal hands, I'm the hands-on volunteer. You need somebody to stand somewhere and translate or direct people, you call me. You need somebody to help load up your truck because something's coming, you call me. I am there.
Good lesbian activity.
The kind of things that I engage myself with are a lot of volunteer works in many different things. When I say unload your truck, the Harvest Project down in South Dallas does give away free produce. So I'll sometimes get a call, hey, we just got a truck and we got like 6 pallets. Can you help unload? Well, here goes my happy butt unloading pallets. The homeless youth count, I'm active with youth ministry. A couple other youth orgs know me to be on call if they need somebody to cover and sit in with their youth. I'm down.
So cool.
And you've done a little bit with Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood does a lot more than abortions. In fact, that's like a minuscule part of what they do. But you were involved a little bit with the, what do you do if someone you know has been involved in some domestic violence?
Yeah, so with Planned Parenthood, I'm a consultant for their Mujer Cafecito program. And that's a once-a-month meeting discussing women's issues. Last month, our conversation was on domestic violence. We actually had somebody from Mosaic Family Services come out, and they did a very informative presentation on domestic violence, what abuse looks like, and what are some of the resources available to women and who to call in that situation. We'll actually be having another Mujer Cafecito next Saturday, and it's going to be Know Your Rights, and that one's also in conjunction with Raíces.
Oh, very cool.
Awesome.
So what do you do in your spare time?
In my spare time, I like to hang out with my wife. I like to talk about philosophy and play video games.
And I was being facetious because she doesn't have any spare time. Mayra, I want you to come back as a guest.
Please do.
Yes,
Thank
absolutely
you so
come
much.
back.
Because you were just busy with everything in the community. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you guys for having me.
Next week, our guest is Sam Smoot from Equality, Texas. Have a good week and be best.
This is William, hopefully your favorite videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like it, please leave comments below, or like, follow, or subscribe to us and get notices of all our videos. We love it, even when you call.